Why is it so easy to ignore our emotions?
Oh my goodness. It's what we're taught from the very beginning. It's sort of embedded in our culture from, sort of the Marlboro Man and the sort of Puritan culture and stiff upper lip that we are supposed to rise above our emotions and use logic and intellect, which is, of course, using rational thought. Logic and intellect is important, but not so great to skip over that other very human piece.
I feel like emotional intelligence has become more of a buzzword within our society rather than actually being practical. Why is emotional education what we really need to be focusing on?
Yes, I felt the same way. So the emotional intelligence is a great, sort of phrase because it alludes to the idea that we have to what I hear is we have to use our emotions intelligently, and we have to, have the intelligence to navigate our emotional life. But what I heard that growing up, and I was like, yes, but there was no, what does that actually mean? There was no practical way to apply it. I had no idea what an emotion was, and I grew up with a psychiatrist, as you know from reading the book, where I share a lot about myself, and I can't even blame my psychiatrist father because I don't think he learned anything about emotions. And it was really only when I went to a conference in New York for trauma and emotions on the recommendation of a friend that was the first time that somebody actually taught me something about my emotions. And not only did I have epiphany after epiphany of understanding myself, but equally, I was like mystified of why hadn't I seen this information anywhere before? I was 39 years old at the time, and I had had really the best education in the sciences. I was a science nerd, and I was a dentist in my first career, where you go to medical school basically for the first 2 years. And then all the psychology education that I had, it just was absent. And it made me kind of reflect on your first question, like what is going on in our society that we're so emotion phobic, that we keep information so kind of cordoned off from the mainstream. And at the time, it was just relegated to therapists that were learning this specialized type of therapy, which I needed to learn because some of my patients, when I was in analytic training, weren't getting better. And not only that, they were mired in shame from the silence and the kind of training that we initially had as therapists to say less and to not be really related, and to kind of have what Freud called that sort of blank slate, so that the patient could kind of just quote unquote project, right, put their feelings and fantasies onto the patient. And this was an entire different way of working that I saw when I learned the emotions education. I was like, there is a void in emotions education in our society. And if I had learned this simple diagram that I ended up sharing in the book that you read and why you wanted to talk to me, if I had seen this when I was 18, it really would have made a difference. And maybe even 16. Just the concept that you couldn't control your emotions was, we were all taught we're supposed to be able to control our emotions, and it turns out they're not under conscious control. And there's many, many examples of all these sort of myths that were busted, myths about emotions that needed to be corrected. So I kind of started getting very, very passionate about emotions education as a concept for the general public.
That is fascinating. It does feel like the word that we tag with emotions is control more so than feel, where we
Mm.
only like we think, okay, that is the uh, reason why emotions exist. It's because we're supposed to control them rather than feel them. And I'd love to dive deeper into that specialized type of therapy. I think it's harder to say than it is to actually understand the way that you write about it, but accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. What exactly is that?
I will tell you that in a moment, but I just love what you said about this concept of controlling emotions. It brought up so many things because it's really in the controlling of emotions that I became so controlling. That's what I'm thinking about, that in having to push down those emotions, we get very sort of tight, and you need to manage the environment so you don't kind of feel too much. And so that shift that started with first learning AEDP, which was really so therapeutic for me. So I can talk about it both in the context of what it is as a therapy, but also, in learning that therapy, which is basically Diana Fosha, who developed it, is an academic. Everything was steeped in science, which allowed me to really look at it because I didn't want any kind of woo-woo sort of new agey stuff that I couldn't feel confident that I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I really wanted to help people with so much integrity in the best way that I could. And so Diana Fosha, who developed AEDP, really synthesized attachment theory, which is how people connect to each other and when things go right and when things go wrong, and emotion theory, which is how emotions work in the mind and body. I try not to use technical words and psychobabble and jargon when I talk, but there's one word I can't really find a substitution for, and that's embedded in AEDP, where Diana Fosha really studied the phenomenology of emotions, meaning working with people in helping them connect to their feelings and then move them up and out through the body so that they could heal from the wounds that we all have from childhood of just having to adapt to society and our parents when it may go against the grain in certain ways, and how does that all work? So so looking at how really universally ADP is about how emotions work in the mind and body, and that there's a predictable way that we sort of all work when it comes to emotions. There's, of course, nuances because we're all different, but the way this triangle, this kind of map to emotions that I started sharing with the public, we all work basically the same way. And there is a phenomenology of emotions, meaning it's consistent, and you can look for certain markers in yourself or when you're working with people. And so drawing from neuroscience and emotion theory and theories about how people transform quickly as opposed to years and years and years of therapy was interesting, and it was effective. And it really changed the way that I worked, and it really changed the way that I understood myself, and it changed my relationships because changed the way that I understood what was happening in moments of conflict and tough moments. When things are going well with people, you don't really need these tools, but it's really, although the tools help, but it's really when there's problems, how do we get unstuck? How do we move things along in a progressive, positive way where we may get moments of disconnection, right? We call that ruptures in the connection. How do we repair? How do we reconnect in a way where we feel even more stronger having been through this disconnection, reconnection cycle? So much. It helps so much. That's why I just went bonkers for it. Wanting to, why didn't I get this? And everybody needs this information. And it's true. I still, after doing this and sharing it for 10 years.
What did your previous work look like, either for yourself personally within your journey or
Hmm.
professionally before you got introduced to AEDP? What
Yeah.
exactly did that look like?
Yeah, well, I'll just speak personally. I managed my emotions with control, like you said, pushing them away, berating myself for having emotions. Um, I I was raised by a very kind and loving mother, which was great. She was a wonderful mother, and my sister, my younger sister, was really gentle soul, kind too. I was the tougher one, and I got told a lot, like many women do, that be nicer, Hillary. And I would experience anger, and I think more than my mother and my sister, and I felt guilty always. I thought that made me a terrible person because I was angry about things. You know, anyone who's a firstborn, when another child is born, it's going to elicit anger in babies, and and my mother was good at validating that anger. But over time, you know, I had a little bit of a crusty exterior that I think was a lot from crunching down more tender emotions, which in my family, my mom didn't do sadness. And so I pushed sadness down. And what happens, what the change triangle shows us, is that when we squash our sadness, we do it with anxiety. And what happens is then that's all you can feel is anxiety. You lose the capacity to feel sadness, which is a core emotion, right? One of these basic inborn wired emotions that every single person is born with, whether they're male, female, or any gender in between. And sadness is a response, a natural response to any type of loss, whether it's the loss of a person that we love, the loss of a pet we love, the loss of a cherished possession, even, you know, when you lose your keys. So, and you experience sadness on various degrees commensurate with how the loss was. And so if there's nobody there to model how to feel sad or to make space for it or permission, and really gives you the impression, which I had, that, you know, we take our emotional cues from our parents. So if my mom is like cheering me up the moment something sad happens, well, then sadness must be dangerous. And so babies from the time they're born can learn to squash and repress their emotions in favor of getting along and pleasing the parent. And then that evolution persists, and then it affects our lives. So, for example, I thought I would become a medical doctor initially instead of a dentist, and I switched paths because it dawned on me that dealing with death and dying would be really challenging for me, would make me so anxious. Had I learned to just move through my sadness, which I teach people all day, every day, and when you learn it, it demystifies it. And even though it's not, it's painful to feel sadness, it's not a great feeling, but just the way we can tolerate stubbing our toe or having hunger pangs, they're just sensations that when you learn what to expect, you can move through them. And then when we move through emotions in these sort of, they're wave-like, when you get to the crest and then the bottom of the wave, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I feel better, and I've integrated that information into my mind and body, my nervous system, and now I can think about, here's the rational thought part, how do I want to use this information, the data that emotions provide? I feel sad, let's say that my friend had my friend's parents died, or my friend experienced a loss. I can feel that sadness now, it's not being blocked. And now I can decide to write a note or to send a casserole or to really just pick up the phone, which I was so afraid to do. Like it felt nuts that I was afraid of people who were feeling sad, afraid of people who were grieving, and afraid to be around people that were experiencing sad things. And then just quickly, as a therapist, it changed everything too, because I could accompany people. I could take people from their symptoms, like depression, addictions, things that affect relationship, like not being able to be accountable, blaming everybody, withdrawing, attacking, and move them through this triangle diagram that I hope your listeners will Google and take a look at, back down to core emotions, so I could help people really go deep, feel these feelings without my own anxiety making me kind of change the subject and avoid it, which you'll see therapists do. And therefore I could really help people not just manage their symptoms, but really change their brain and nervous system and heal, which is something that we never talked about in psychoanalytic training. You didn't talk about healing, you talked about insight.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the important point there is that, and I don't think it's commonly understood or appreciated, that emotions are rooted more so in your body rather than your mind.
Totally. Totally. In fact, they are completely rooted in the body, meaning that when a core emotion, like I used to wonder why, about the five senses, what are the meaning of our five senses? And now I really know it links to specifically being able to, our survival systems scan the environment and pick up, let's talk about something dangerous. So, like our eyes will pick up like a vicious dog coming at us, for example, or we'll feel somebody running up behind us, and we'll get like that this feeling of that something is ominous or bad. And anyway, through whatever sense it comes in, that there's danger lurking, it goes right to the middle of our brain, the limbic system. Which is not a conscious area, it's an unconscious area. And from the limbic system, when there's something that has enough kind of valence or cadence or activation that says this is important for us to be aware of, us meaning our mind and body, it'll ignite an emotion like fear. And then it does this without any conscious control. So that's why we can't stop emotions from happening. Once the limbic system is kind of lit up with the fear program, if you want to think of it as a software program, it then goes down to the lower brain, which is connected to the vagus nerve, which is connected to every organ of the body. Because the purpose of core emotions is to get our body ready for an action. And that action is meant to be adaptive for survival. So once, let's take the example that a dog is running towards us, our body is going to get ignited through our muscles and our heart and where blood is pumped to get us ready to run to safety. There's nothing conscious about this yet because the thinking thoughts work slower than the body. So from evolution, it made it much more advantageous to have these quick responses. And it's only once we run to safety that we can reflect, I'm scared. I was scared. I was scared that dog was going to hurt me. So emotions are completely physical in nature. And then the second half is that our cortex and prefrontal cortex can, once the body is activated, sense the experience happening below the neck and then put a label on it, which we're incidentally taught by our parents that had no emotions education and that are kind of have a lot of trauma on their own part, may not pick up emotional cues. They may kind of give backward cues. But most of us had parents that when we were scared could say something like, oh, that was scary. And then in that process, you begin to match the feeling in my body, my mother and father's response with this feeling. And now I know when I'm scared for the rest, for my future, I can say, oh, this is scary. And it's really important to be able to label our emotions because that's what calms us down. But yes, emotions are physical.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to make that distinction of just, okay, emotions equal physiological sensations rather than simply thoughts. Because I think just like within common society and culture, I think we create the correlation between emotions and thoughts. And that's why we have such difficulty with this concept of feeling our emotions, because we believe it to mean like, okay, I need to feel my thoughts. Like, what exactly does that mean? But it's like, no, becoming more in tune with your body and feeling your emotions on that physiological way. We've talked about it a little here already with the change triangle, but would love to just lay the explicit groundwork for exactly what that is. Can you explain what the change triangle is and what each corner means and how it works together?
Absolutely. Can I backtrack? Because I just wanted to say 100% what you said about that sort of why we're all kind of paralyzed in a way to work with feelings, because we do think that there's some emotions are happening in the head. And I just did for people listening out there, I wanted to even be specific that what you can learn and what is that when I feel fear, right? Or let's say I'm trying to let's say let me, in a way it might be easier if I go back with my how I got over my problem feeling sadness, is I was only experiencing anxiety, right? Which a lot of people have as a jitteriness in their body, or they'll have like a pit in their stomach, or their heart is racing, or they'll get sweaty or something like that. And once I learned, first of all, when I heard that emotions were physical the first time I went to this conference, I think we all, when we hear that, go, oh, that makes so much sense. Of course they are. It's just intuitive. And that was so relaxing as a concept. And then learning that, like, the sadness, as I was taught and I had read about in these academic books, would be a feeling that's like heavy in my chest. That was normal. A feeling that I wanted behind my eyes, that I wanted to cry. That was normal. And that when I did cry, I would feel better. Oh, that made sense too. So with each of the core emotions on the change triangle, which we can now segue to, they're going to have a different program, and they're going to affect the body in its own unique way that's commensurate with the physiology of the action that this emotion is supposed to prompt us to do. So the change triangle, which is a two-dimensional diagram of something that is a very dynamic, so the diagram itself we want to bring to life. And so as I try to explain it, if you envision an upside down triangle with the point of it in your body, let's say like between your belly button and your ribs. And then the triangle kind of comes up with the top of the triangle, the top flat part, let's say hovering above your shoulders, because when the core emotions are in the body, they're at the point of this upside down triangle. So we can visualize all these emotions that might get triggered that happen in the body, and the core emotions that are on the change triangle, and that are the common ones that get us into trouble when we bury them, are fear, sadness, anger, disgust, joy, excitement, and sexual excitement, right? And these are, again, everybody has all these emotions, and they're all normal, and they're all wired in. And at birth, these are ready to go so that we can communicate with our caregivers, mostly, obviously, as an infant, non-verbally. And most of communication, even between adults, is nonverbal, facial expressions. Right? These emotions are pulling our facial muscles, our body posture, and that's why we can all kind of, emotions are contagious, and we can read each other's feelings. If you ask like a teenager, how are you? I'm fine. Well, we know you're not fine, but you can't say that. You have to be a little more clever. So if you picture an upside down triangle with the core emotions in your body, what happens is when we adapt to our families and our peers and our community groups and our religions, right, we are slowly restricted in our emotional expression and bandwidth because we're told not to, don't be a sissy, or pick yourself up for your bootstraps. Don't be so happy. Don't be so proud of yourself. Don't be conceited. Put a smile on your face. All these things. And so as we disconnect from the core emotions, we move up the change triangle to the two corners on the top that are located, again, out of your body, because we kind of move out of our body towards our head. So the top right corner is this other category of normal emotions that we all have, whose job is to push down the core emotions that are trying to push up. And the squasher emotions, or inhibitory emotions, as I call them, as they are called in AEDP and in the change triangle, and you will all recognize them all listening, and you, of course, Tim, will know them: anxiety, guilt, and shame. And these emotions serve a purpose when we have small amounts. So in other words, we have to suppress emotions to get along with groups. Like if we got angry and then we just started punching everybody we were angry at, because these, again, these core emotions have physical impulses. So sometimes you may feel like punching your best friend in the nose if they, by accident, insult you. But we don't do that because we feel guilty. We learn that it's not okay to hit people. We learn, and so when we get queued up with either anxiety, guilt, or shame, that pushes that emotion down so that we aren't banished and excluded from groups, that we can all get along, because survival of humans is also completely reliant on us all working together and getting along. So we have this inherent tension between these core emotions, which you could say, what's best for me, and these inhibitory emotions that are pushing them down, saying, what's best for me to get along with everybody? First my mommy, then my mommy and daddy, and then my friends, and then again it goes out and out into society and the workplace, right? We can't start crying and raging in our work, we'll get fired. So we learn how to manage that. The problem is that when no one helps us with emotions, and these core emotions are kind of just stirring around in the body, swirling around, being pushed down by these inhibitory emotions that are in excess, because we are being criticized for aspects of ourself, like the emotion itself is bad, or our sexuality is bad, or the color of our skin is bad. Things about ourselves we have to push down. When we have all these emotions going around in our body, it feels terrible. And then we move over to the top left-hand corner of the triangle, which are called defenses. And defenses are also fantastic. They are the brilliant and creative ways that and there's tons and tons of ways we do this, that we are able to spare ourselves feeling uncomfortable from emotions. So just to give examples of some of the defenses that we all use. On a light level, after a stressful day, I love playing solitaire on my phone. It's just grounding. That's the use of a defense sort of on purpose, right? I'm not feeling my body. I'm not feeling my stress. I'm just distracting myself, right? And that's fine. Defenses are great. We all need them and we all want to use them, but we want to use them flexibly and with awareness. What happens is that as we've experienced more wounding, more traumas, the defenses become more entrenched, and we see defenses like alcoholism. We see eating disorders. We see blaming and constant judgment, and like pathological narcissism, where you can't even take accountability for ever making a mistake because there's too much shame to grapple with underneath it. So we sort of block all the feelings. We ruminate and we stay in our head. We over-intellectualize. These are all the defenses that we use. And defenses are often the symptoms that people come into therapy with. I have chronic anxiety. I can't stop being anxious. I can't see people. I have social anxiety. Depression is a defense. Even though it's got a feeling about it, it's really when you're devoid of energy and you're squashing down lots of emotions that puts too much stress on the mind and body, and we can't make enough of the chemicals that we need to help us feel and function, like getting out of bed and going to work and showering, and things, and we start to be able, go inner and not be able to meet the demands of life. And life is very hard, full of suffering and full of challenges. And so those are the 3 points on the triangle. The last part of the triangle, I can pause for you, is that part underneath the triangle. You want me to?
Yeah,
It's a lot.
let's stick with those 3 right there, because I think there's a lot to unpack there, and then we can get into the open-hearted section after that.
Yeah.
What I love most about the change triangle, 2 big things. It brings literal visibility and tangibility to emotions, and actually understanding something that can just commonly feel so blind for people. And what I find so fascinating with the change triangle as a whole is that it's just a complete recalibration of the way that we understand and experience emotions, especially when we start talking about things like anxiety and depression. And the way that I see it is that obviously if somebody's depressed or if they're chronically anxious, they think that's okay, like this is the problem, this is what I need to deal with, this is what I need to resolve, and you just keep staying focused on that very one-dimensional word and thing. When it comes to the change triangle, it's like, hey, depression, anxiety, this might be the manifestation, or this might be just the thing that is on the surface that is kind of tapping at you to be like, hey, we need to get underneath that. And what that is the core emotions.
Exactly, exactly. So it's like a revelation. And I experienced two clinical depressions in my 30s, and I went on Prozac because what else was I going to do? I didn't it taught me to go easy on myself and to be less type A and heap on stress, but I still didn't know. I went on Prozac for 6 months, then like the psychiatrist said, and then I felt better, and it happened one more time. But then after I saw the change triangle, I could understand why I got depressed, the root of it, and then work on it and work on my fears and my anger and all the things that I needed to really pay attention to. And I've never had another depression since. I mean, it's such a life-changing tool, and I love the way you say it. You're absolutely right. It just changes it from kind of putting a Band-Aid on something, and medication is fine. There's no problem with it, and it's a lifesaver at times. But it always needs to be used in concert with understanding oneself through the lens of the change triangle. Whether it doesn't have to be AEDP therapy, it could be any therapist that understands the change triangle and knows how to usher somebody through a core emotion without the therapist getting anxious. Really, that you need a therapist that has the confidence in the ability to go deep into the emotions.
How does the feeling of core emotions differ from inhibitory emotions?
What a great question. I think that might be different for everyone. I don't know whether you can answer that, and I would answer it for myself, because we seem to, in my experience as a therapist and talking about this for the last decade, is we kind of all have, people have there's like a few cyclical patterns that we know what the problem emotions are, and we know where we go when we get stressed. And so, but I would say, and I can't tell, the reason I struggle to answer this is because it's informed by kind of how I visualize all this happening in my body through the change triangle. So, for me, I will get anxious and I'll feel that sort of, again, it's that like vibration kind of feeling in my body. And there's like, I can't tell if it feels like there's a stuckness, or I just know that anxiety, when a patient comes in, for example, we don't deepen anxiety. We don't deepen the inhibitory emotions. And what that literally means is when someone is telling me they're anxious, I won't say, I'll help them know what anxiety feels like in their body, but I won't typically say, can you just stay with that anxiety and just stay with it? Like I would a core emotion, what I would say is, as we're with that anxiety, and can you imagine going right through it or pushing it aside, what emotions underneath it, what core emotions can you identify? And if someone doesn't know right off the bat, which is common and no problem, very normal, then I'll say, look, I'm just gonna name each one, and kind of be with your anxiety, and just see if you get like a whiff that it's like all this is very subtle, but we want to let the body tell us, because the body doesn't lie, and it's where the action is. So if someone is with their anxiety, I'll say, do you feel sadness? Oh, check. Do you feel any anger? Oh, yeah, check. Do you feel any fear? No. Any joy? No. And we'll run through them all, and then we go through each emotion one at a time. So I'll just validate you feel some sadness and some anger. maybe which one feels most front and center. Oh, I guess right now I feel some sadness, and then I'll say, okay, let's respectfully ask your anger if it might like step back in the waiting room. That's literally what I say. And let's just be with sadness. And then my next question is, what inside your body lets you know that you're feeling sad? And I help people, the key to this all is slowing down to a snail's pace. Because working with emotions, what's happening in the body manifests much, much slowly, almost like when you're driving into a fog, and then slowly you can begin to make out the houses and the mailboxes on the side of the road, but it's initially you don't see anything. So it's really going slow and giving your body time to speak its own language to you versus our thoughts, which come, too quickly, and then part of anxiety, we're like musing with too many thoughts. So basically to answer your question, as soon as I feel anxiety, I right away know from working the change triangle for the last 10 years that I'm going to ask myself which emotion I'm going to feel and then work with each emotion.
And how much of that work is about empowering people to then being able to see these emotions like sadness or anger that we would commonly think as negative things and bad, and this is bad that I'm feeling this, to more so of, hey, this can actually be a good thing that I'm feeling right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing, not that it feels good, but it's a good thing in that emotions need validation. Like, it's a good thing in that it's on the road to feeling better. So that I know that if I am with my sadness, and I know that if I am with my anger, and it's a practice, the change triangle, over a lifetime. And some people get it fast. Like, I just got it right away. My husband will tell you it took him 10 years to really understand the change triangle. And I first saw it in 2004. So it's really been 20 years. I've just been kind of teaching it to the public for 10 years. So yes, you can think of core emotions, really all emotions, as data that is meant to be used. And for me, the goal for me is, well, there's sort of two kind of goals. One is to use my emotions constructively and not destructively. Like, particularly as a parent, I wish I had known this stuff when I was a young parent, because my emotions just made me anxious, and my anxiety made me want to fix my kids and was controlling and all these things that was sort of repeating this idea of not making space for emotions. I mean, I wasn't terrible, but I know I could have done better. And most of it, when I teach parents about emotions, like I mentioned, we just published a new book called Parents Have Feelings Too. It's all about the parent understanding emotions so that they can work the change triangle to get to a calmer place. Because what kids need when they're having emotions is a calm parent who can just listen, not be reactive, and kind of engage the kid in, when they're old enough, in collaborative, like, okay, is there, how can I support you in this? Like, really, like, underreacting.
And is working the change triangle like going into conversation with yourself, or is it actually not trying to do that and focus more so on the sensory?
Yeah. These are wonderful questions, Tim, that I have not been asked before, and they're just right on target. I go into conversation about myself sometimes, particularly about anxieties that feel like they're not really processable with core emotions. Like, for example, I have some public speaking engagements coming up. I have been afraid of public speaking, since I was in plays in middle school. I wanted to do these things, and I say yes, but I don't sleep for weeks. As soon as I say yes, and it bums me out because I want to be able to share this information. So I do have a lot of conversations with myself about, Hilary, it's just triggering fear. You want to have courage. The fear is irrational. And it's present moment stuff, which is different then processing emotions that are rooted in wounds from the past, where you would sit with the feeling to kind of liberate it, and then it's in my body. So I feel like I did a lot of that, or all of the old stuff I have processed through, when you become a therapist, you have to be in therapy, or you're wise to be anxiety. You don't want to see a therapist that hasn't done their own work, for sure. So, but even so, there's new things that come up in daily life that trigger the old things again, particularly with my kids. And I get so proud of myself. Like just the other day, something was coming up about my kid moving, and it brought up old anxieties about my own opinions about where that we're going to move to. Like, I don't know, maybe your parents had feelings about you moving out of Connecticut and going to Austin. And when I was younger, I wouldn't have understood what was going on. I just would have felt entitled to just say my opinion. And then, and then it's downhill from there, because if your kids aren't like grasping for your opinion, and usually adult children don't really, it's like nice to ask, do you want my opinion? Do you want my advice? That's just respectful, right? You wouldn't just bombard a friend necessarily, or maybe some people would, but, and so I was able to see the trigger in real time, in present day, this happen, and notice my anxiety and kind of relate to my anxiety as, oh, you want to express yourself. You've got all these worries about them not being happy where they move. But, the talk is like, Hilary, you don't necessarily know best. You're operating also from, you're old now, you're in your 60s, and you're out of touch. Maybe they know something you don't know. So it's like, it's a combination of, the crux of really mental health is being able to be with the full range of your core emotions, which is about an internal experience. And once you are kind of clear on what's happening inside me, inside you, inside oneself, then we want to really think through, again, how to use this information constructively in relationships, in not being self-destructive, in having a positive upward cycle of emotional health and physical health.
Is it always with the distanced self-talk with third person for you?
Yeah, I mean, yes, in a way, right? Because I talk about the authentic self as being this kind of, this part of us that we are born with that is immovable, and that it's got a wisdom to it. And then stuff happens, and we're blown off course with our triggers and our traumas and our wounds. But the whole point of working the change triangle is to come back to this, the authentic self, which feels inside, right? Because I ask, when we get to it, I milk it for everything. Like, what does it feel? Because people will talk about in the phenomenology after we process emotions, wow, I feel better. I feel lighter. I was terrified to feel that feeling. It only took 2 minutes. And now I feel this solidness inside. And I'll say, well, can you stay with that feeling of solidity? That's another thing we stay with, we deepen. What's it like to feel that inside? Oh, it makes me feel like rooted. Like, so people start to talk about all these experiences. And that's how I relate to myself as, I don't take what I say to I don't take the bait of my emotions necessarily. But that's not always true, because let's say somebody I love died. I'm going to feel my fear, but I'm also going to have this space between myself, not my fear, my grief. I say fear because I do fear my husband dying. I love him, and I fear people I love dying, and that's normal, but it's really grief that we fear. You know what I mean? And the bottom line is the grief and the terrible pain of that type of grief. And so sometimes I imagine what that would be like in the future, almost like as a dress rehearsal, to make sure I can kind of tolerate it and what it might be like. Maybe that sounds macabre, but that's sort of maybe a controlling way to kind of manage these things. So, but I definitely feel this idea of me, and then there'll be my grief. And the separation from those two things is very helpful. And we do want to kind of separate. I am not my feelings. I am not my depression. I am not my anxiety. I am not my grief. And yet these things deeply affect me. And what can I do to feel better?
How can our imagination be a useful tool with all this?
So what's interesting from a scientific research standpoint is that we can use imagination like it's reality, just like I said, trying on like the death of somebody I love. The brain does not know the difference in many ways between reality and fantasy. Fantasy meaning imagination. And there are experiments where they have hooked people up. This was based in research of hooking people up where they can see different parts of the brain lighting up in fMRIs, where they ask someone to imagine running, and it lights up the same areas of the brain as if somebody was actually running. So using imagination is exceedingly useful in psychotherapy, and everything that I do in psychotherapy, as a psychotherapist, I want people to be able to take out and use on their own in their self-awareness and self-help work. One of my favorite ways, and one of the most important ways to use fantasy, is helping people process old anger. In other words, anger from wounds that happened a long time ago, where that anger got stuffed down. And most of the time people are coming to me for depression, let's say, and in hearing a story of all these things that happened to a particular person when they were young, like their parents were abusive or neglectful, or maybe their parents had good intention, but because of their own parents' childhoods and traumas, they unintentionally were emotionally abusive, like yelling when a kid is sick, or yelling when a kid makes a mistake, or when a kid doesn't succeed in sports, like these type of things. And what happens is when we get yelled at as children, we might see cowering, but before the cowering is anger, because again, these are how these core emotions work. If you yell at me, that feels like an attack, like you're attacking me, and I'm going to get angry. But if anger is not allowed, I'm going to quickly squash it down with shame or anxiety or guilt. And by the time this adult appears in my office, I'm just going to see the tip of the iceberg, the defenses, the symptoms. And so one might say, well, how do you process old anger at one's parents? And again, I just want to clarify, because these are the things in society that bother people. I'm not in the business of blaming parents. I have empathy for parents. I have empathy for myself and my mistakes, and compassion, because we didn't know better. But it's what I say with patients who say, I don't want to blame my parents. I say, I totally agree. But can we agree that your parents were the responsible party as opposed to you as a 2-year-old? And everybody can agree that the adults are the responsible party. So that's where we go. So we would, somebody would talk about, let's say, some transgression that the parent locked them in a room or something traumatic. And we ultimately get to fear, sadness, and anger in that adult patient. And when we get to anger, the way we might work with it is feeling it in the body. What do you feel in the body as you were remembering what your father did to you? Oh, I feel like energy coming up. I feel a burning heat. I feel like tension in my jaw, and my fists kind of are tense. And then we go, like I said earlier, with the nonverbal. I'm trained to look at the body, because that's where the unconscious, that's where the action is. So I might say, just notice your fists. Not trying to make you self-conscious. We want to really use that. Just tune into your fists. And if your fists could do what they wanted to do right now to your dad in fantasy, right? Your dad is not getting hurt. This is not a dress rehearsal. What is the impulse that this core emotion of anger wants to do to your father? And I do a lot of it's not you, it's anger, it's this primitive program, it's programmed to be mean, it's programmed to be aggressive, right? And all the aggression we're seeing in the world, I believe, is from unprocessed anger, that people don't know how to release it and then think through, maybe it's not a good idea that we go to war, those type of things. So people will imagine punching or beating the crap out of someone who hurt them in a vivid fantasy like a movie until that feeling is out of them. And they do. It reaches an end point. It's not never ending, just like patients worry about crying and that it'll never stop. And I just say, I can completely, you got to borrow my confidence. You will stop crying. And after 2 minutes, most emotions only, pure core emotions last about 2 minutes. But anyway, after imagining vividly beating up a family member, person will feel the relief and then enter that open-hearted state, that core authentic self where they feel calmer, they feel more integrated, they feel the relief, the lightness, and often then the love flows in. It's so counterintuitive. We get rid of these blocks, and compassion and love and calm and all these C words that are characteristic of being in touch with the authentic self, like compassion and calm and clarity and curiosity and connection, these flow in. And predictably, it's beautiful to witness.
Can forgiveness be an inhibitory emotion?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I can sense intuitively that you might know, especially in our culture where we're taught to forgive before we've processed the emotions. So often we might feel spontaneous forgiveness if that's just who we are. But for many of us, we have to process the anger first. We have to feel the sadness that this happened to us and mourn for our young selves. And then the forgiveness can flow in naturally. And also anger can be a defense. Any of these core emotions can function defensively. So that with a lot of men, a lot of my patients are men these days, and there's more interest these days. It's wonderful that men are getting more information about their emotions, but men get a terrible rap in our society and told that they are weak for feeling sadness or fear, these tender emotions. The squashing down of tender emotions is often done with anger and aggression, and they become perpetrators, and so that's really not great. And conversely, women are told that it's bad to feel angry, so they squash their anger down in tears. I often have women that are furious and they're just crying, and then we have to get curious about what that's about and help them get back to their anger.
So working our way down the change triangle into that open-hearted state, what exactly does that process look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the best way to think of this is that the core emotions are sort of a doorway that can swing either side. When we block them, we move up the change triangle into inhibitory emotions and defenses. But when we experience them physically, and to experience an emotion is basically 4 steps. We have to be able to name it. We have to be able to tolerate how it feels in our body and say, oh, my sadness, I can feel this heaviness in my chest and I can bear being with it without getting anxious, right? And that's a capacity we have to build, like going to the gym. It's like we build it on our own with practice, or we build it with a therapist, or we build it we work through my books in the exercises there. When we have to be able to recognize the impulse when we are trying to experience an emotion, and we have to let that the impulse and the energy of the emotion flow out in various techniques and ways that I show in the books and on my website. And sometimes, again, we can do that alone, and sometimes we need help to do that. But when we fully experience the emotion, then we drop down into this open-hearted state where we feel calm and we feel all those C words, and we feel connected to ourself. And even though it may be hard to, the process is hard, we have a saying in AEDP that nothing that feels bad is ever the last step. And that's because we help people fully process a core emotions till they feel better, and there's always relief at the end. And then when you drop into that open-hearted state of the authentic self, then we can, the very last step is to think our way through, what do we do with this feeling? I'm mad at my spouse, or I'm mad at my partner. Do I talk about it with them? How do I talk about it with them in a way that bridges connection and not disconnection? Or maybe I've now recognized that this anger doesn't really have anything to do with the present. It's triggering an old feeling from the past. Now that I've done that, the anger has subsided and I don't really even need to have a conversation about it.
An interesting component of that open-hearted state that isn't explicitly on the change triangle, but I think can go to the experience. So we start doing this work, we start processing our core emotions, we're starting to see some progress and some improvements in our well-being, but that can actually potentially lead to a feeling of uneasiness or fear because we have become so deeply ingrained within this old identity of who we are that it's a little scary to be open to these good feelings in a way. I
Yes.
mean, how do people break out of that old identity so that when they do get into this open-hearted state, it feels natural?
Yeah, it's just a capacity that you build by tolerating the anxiety. I've been working for about 5 years on becoming less of a workaholic. And it's like, who am I if I am not pushing myself and working and working and working? And as I try to move into some sort of semi-retirement, who will I be? What will I think about? And getting that kind of balance. And I have to tolerate, like sometimes a very empty feeling when I don't heap on the work. And I just tolerate it. I feel it in my body. I know what it is now. But it's just, it takes sometimes years, but that's okay because you feel good. I feel good. The progress of working on myself and building that self-awareness is in and of itself very gratifying.
Hilary, it's been great talking with you today. Where can people go to learn more about you, the work that you do, also the books that you've written, anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is the books, and you don't even have to pay for them. You can get them at the library, and they're on audio if you want to listen to them the car. And the reason it's not always depression would be the most important thing to listen to is because of the stories. Because you can't think your way through an emotion, you have to experience it. It's challenging to give people an experience in sort of just by teaching and preaching, and so that the stories allow people to be a fly on the wall in my therapy sessions, which I had videotaped because that's how we learn. So I have these verbatim transcripts that I was able to put into narratives with my patients' permissions, and you really get a feel for what it looks like and feels like to experience a core emotion. So the first thing would be to pick up It's Not Always Depression and try to get it at the library if you don't want to buy it. And then after that, my website is basically a hub for emotion education resources at hilaryjacobshendel.com. But if you Google the Change Triangle, you'll find tons on it. I've written for like major media outlets, and I have a Change Triangle YouTube channel where we can do some experiential stuff together. Because that's really the hardest part, is coming out of the intellect, the safety of the head, and into the body. And I remember what sort of a leap of faith that is. And so just having someone to journey with, or doing these things as a group, having a book group or something like that where everybody reads a chapter a week of It's Not Always Depression and does the exercises together. So lots of ways to find out more, and just to always be compassionate to yourself while you're doing this, and it's a lifelong process.
Awesome. Great talking with you today.
Thanks so much, Tim.